Dumela, Sanbonani, good morning. Have you made your mind up? Who are you voting for on the 29th of May? Today, I have BOSA, Build One South Africa. It's a party led by Musi Maimani. And in studio, I have the premier candidate, Nobuntu Webster. Nobuntu, she is the co-founder and deputy president of BOSA. She's the founder of SA's Women's Commission and former chairperson of Business Women Association of South Africa. She holds an honors degree and she has several postgraduate business qualifications. Currently, she is BOSA's premier candidate. Nobuntu, welcome to the show. How are you?
I am good, thank you, and thank you for having me.
I think let's start here. You come across as a businesswoman, not very much political. Let's take it back to when you were young. Where were you? What were you doing before politics?
So interesting that you say I come across as a businesswoman, not political. Anybody who knows me,
yes,
everybody who knows me, when this season or this chapter of my life started, we're like, well, we've been waiting for this. It was quite expected. I have been nicknamed Madam President for a long time, probably since I was about 20.
Okay.
And you asked about growing up. I grew up in Durban. Grew up in two different worlds. So I grew up in the townships of Lamontville and Inanda in Durban. From the age of about 4 or 5, I traveled to the suburbs every day to go to school. So I grew up in the two South Africas, or the multiple South Africas that so many of us know and traverse through in some way or another in South Africa.
Yes.
And it was something that was quite significant to me. Growing up, it was significant that every day I'd wake up, dusty streets. We lived in a forum house. We had an outside toilet. It wasn't even a flushing toilet. And I would travel to the richest suburb in Durban, one of the richest suburbs in Durban, where I went to a private school.
Is that Umhlanga?
No, it's Musgrave.
Okay.
And I would go to school there in Morningside, Musgrave and Morningside, to a private school. My friends that I went to school with, I was the only black kid in class for pretty much all my life. My friends that I went to school with lived in mansions. So I would live between those two very different worlds as a child. And my father would explain it to me. I come from quite a political history at home. And my father has people who were activists, really. And my father would explain to me and say, the reason why we take you to the schools, not because we have money. We don't have money. We're scrambling to make this happen.
Yes.
But we do this. And this is like when I started school, it was the late 80s.
Yes.
And he would say, we do this because the system of this country does not allow you to have a good education. It does not allow you to have a good future in this country. So this is us trying to give you, as a black child, a good future in this country.
So, just going back. So then, at that time after high school, you didn't go into politics in varsity, or you went to study into business?
No, I did. I did go into politics, into varsity briefly, in university. In fact, I was part of SASCO, and I remember going to my first meeting at SASCO and being elected into some committee and thinking, what the hell? What is this? What is going on here? I was already being elected into committees, but I didn't see it through, I'd get involved in the marches and when there was activism, but I didn't see it through. I think that my life has always been of activism, though. I've always been involved in activism during university, after university. I remember being at Fees Must Fall. By then, I'm a businesswoman. I'm married with 2 kids, but I was there marching to the union buildings for Fees Must Fall. There was a time when there was tear gas, and I remember my mother's watching this on TV, and she's calling me, and she's like, "You're a grown woman, married with kids. What the heck are you doing in marches?" And what are your, you have children. Those kids don't have children. Get home. You better get yourself home. I was one of the coordinators of Unite Against Corruption. If you remember when there was those marches against corruption that ultimately ended with marches, Zuma must fall marches and all that.
Save
SA marches. I wasn't part of Save SA, but I was part of Unite Against Corruption, and I was a coordinator, national coordinator for Unite Against Corruption. So I have always been an activist, and in fact, me being in business was a form of activism for myself. Because when you fast forward to now, when I started working post-university, I started working, and I was doing well. I was one of those people who was getting promoted every couple of months, and I'm doing well. But I remember once, and at this point I'm like 23, and I remember sitting and looking at the letterhead at work, and seeing all these names. I saw these are all, names that I can't relate to. And this now would have been early 2000s. These are names I can't relate to. I want to know that as a Black female, I want to know that there are businesses that are owned by Black female. I want to know that the economy is just. I want to know that there's opportunity for all.
So you didn't want to be the one who's a special kind.
No, I didn't. I didn't. And I mean, the other thing is that while I worked and was doing well in the company, I started to think about ownership and how do we start to, have equity and ownership? How do we start to see ownership starting to balance out, and how do we start to have ownership opportunity for everybody? So I went into business at the age of 24. And the big part of it was political for me. It was, let me start a business owned by a Black woman. Let me employ young people who I will give the opportunity for skill. And hopefully they'll go start their own businesses and do the same.
So I see also that you founded Businesswomen's Commission.
Yeah.
What was that all about?
The South African Women's Commission, the Businesswomen's Association, I was chairperson of. And I mean, the Businesswomen's Association of South Africa is old. It's older than me. I've had, I had about 5-6 years as chairperson of the Businesswomen's Association. I founded the South African Women's Commission. And the South African Women's Commission is about assembling women to say, what are we contributing to change in South Africa? And it's not even necessarily about women's issues, but it was founded on the back of 1956. And our first assembly, our first gathering was in August. And it was about the fact that you look around and you look at all the commemorations and celebrations of Women's Day. And you have to ask yourself, given what those women of 1956 did, women of different races, women of different classes, domestic workers, women who were professionals, women, Indian, Black, colored, white women, who all marched in solidarity against the pass laws. And the pass laws were not just the pass laws. The pass laws were symbolic of a government that sought to marginalize a people. They were symbolic of economic oppression, really. To say that you can't have access to economic opportunity, or this is the only way you can have access to economic opportunity, or your access to economic opportunity is limited. And so I founded the South African Women's Commission because I believe that women have a big role to play in the change in this country, even today.
Definitely.
And that, in fact, we've seen what we've seen, and we've seen some of, the attempts, particularly politically, to change the country. But really, there hasn't been much change. And I think that part of that solution lies with women. And we need to see a balance in leadership in terms of this country, politically and otherwise. And so the South African Women's Commission comes together, we assemble, and we talk about what can we, as a grouping, as a collective of women, do to transform education, to transform the economy, to transform issues that relate to safety and security in this country.
You also came, I remember when Musi left the DA, he went with One South Africa for All, which was a community-led initiative, getting community-based. And I tend to think to myself, why not the individual, why community?
The very essence of Ubuntu.
Nobuntu.
Yes.
Yeah, pun intended.
Pun intended.
Yes.
I believe very much in Ubuntu, not because it's my name, but I believe in it because I believe we're stronger as a collective.
Yes.
And so I think the idea of communities and community-led movements, community-led leadership is what this country has been lacking.
True.
We've found that even when you look at governance and politics today, those who represent us as leaders and those who lead us are far removed from what's happening in the community. And so it's the community who's got to set the agenda.
Yes.
It's the community who's got to say, here is what needs to happen. Here's what we want and here's what we need as a community. And so for me, I think that is the importance of that. That is not even was, is the importance of 1SA, because 1SA still exists. And that is the importance of even what we're doing at Build 1SA, which is, choosing leaders from communities and having communities back and endorse leaders to be able to be candidates.
I think that was the idea. Because remember when we were told, like, this is more of community-led, independent candidates, getting people in communities to speak up. Then came a political party, say, Build One South Africa. As a co-founder, the transition from this movement to a political party, give us a background.
So you know what happened with the Electoral Amendment Bill, and that when the Electoral Act was amended,
yes,
it really did not serve independence as much as we had wanted, and as much as we had tabled for them to have been served. The bill at this point still favors big political parties to this day. Even now, as new political parties, we had to submit in excess of 60,000 signatures, something that's new, in order to contest. Whereas the current parties that exist, the bigger parties, did not have to prove that communities and constituencies want them to run.
Yes.
And just because people voted for parties 5 years ago, it doesn't mean that even today they would want them to contest. So that is just one example, of some of the issues. And so we then, when we founded Build One South Africa with BOSA, worked, and with a couple of others, worked on a model to say, how do you then have a hybrid model that allows you to still have candidates, leaders who are chosen by communities, but how do you then leverage this and consolidate it into the benefits of a political party that still exists now? And so Build 1SA is in some way a hybrid model of taking what we have and what we've been dealt with in terms of law and legislation in the bill, but then also saying we still want to pursue this idea of leaders that come from communities and are chosen by communities.
I'm going to go to this. You are famous in the country. You are on the billboards. You are the premier candidate of Gauteng. And just on the poster, 2 million jobs in every home. And you spoke extensively on the township economy on your manifesto. When you look at the township right now and how the economy itself, it's slowly but surely, some are saying illegal foreigners are taking it, the Pakistani shops, the Chinese in the hardware sector. How do we then revive and bring it back to our people in the township?
So first of all, the thing I want to say is that when you look at South Africa's economy, it is so heavily reliant on the mainstream economy.
True.
And you look at our unemployment. Currently, by the expanded definition, we have over 40% unemployment, close to 70% unemployment of young people.
Yes.
And when you look at that, you do have a mainstream economy, and it's working. But the reality is that it does not have the ability to absorb that level of unemployment.
Yes.
And so in order to grow the economy, you've got to expand it. You've got to expand it beyond this mainstream economy that exists. And I would say you also have to expand it geographically. Say, how do you have economic activity outside of the current industrial zones or industrial areas, outside of the current commercial areas? How do you expand that? And the township economy is how you expand that. And there are so many other benefits other than the fact that you then have more economic activity. You then are able to employ more people and have more people employed. You also then have holistic benefit for families and communities.
Yes.
You have people who are able to live where they work and work where they live. Because currently, part of the issues that we have is that when people have to leave at 4 or 5 a.m., leave their families, come back at 7 p.m., 8 p.m., what happens to the family? What happens in community? Who's raising those children? Who's spending time with children, doing homework with children, and all that kind of thing? So that's also the benefit. But to speak to the more practical side, what we've tabled as Build 1SA is to say we want to establish a jobs and justice fund.
Yes.
And what that would do is it would pool all the employment funding It would pool funding, empowerment funding, sorry. It would pool funding that comes from the private sector, which currently is legislated under the Triple BE Act. But what you do is you pool that private sector funding, you pool government funding for empowerment, and you put them in the Jobs and Justice Fund. What you then do with it is that you identify townships that become special economic zones. Those townships where they are special economic zones, you're able to have tax benefits. You're able to have employment incentives for businesses that operate in those special economic zones in townships. You secondly are able to invest in viable businesses that sit in townships. One of the issues with the funding that has existed for SMEs and for township businesses has been that, first of all, you actually have not necessarily had funding that is enough funding or adequate funding that is ring-fenced for some township businesses. The policies exist, but you have not had funding that's ring-fenced. And then where you do have SME funding, the hurdles that entrepreneurs have to jump through in order to get that funding makes it impossible to be able to have the kind of transformation that we want to see and growth in the SME sector. People have to, I remember being a young person applying to NYDA for funding.
Yes.
And I remember being asked for a payslip. And I was like, well, this is bizarre. I'm an entrepreneur.
Yes.
And I am starting, why do you need a payslip? And I found that even as a consultant, so one of my businesses does economic development consulting and enterprise development consulting. And I've consulted to government and to the private sector. And what I found when you look at that is that the reality is that all the different criteria to get this funding are the same as commercial banks. The state has to be able to underwrite, government has to be able to underwrite funding to SMEs, to entrepreneurs. Otherwise, we're going to get nowhere.
But then the question is, where do you think they failed with it? There was an NYDA, then now there was something called Youth Employment Service or something, but I'm not sure what it called. And then there was SMMEs. But none of them, they seem to be quite efficient in addressing the issues. Where did they get it wrong and how are you going to get it right?
So the first is having practitioners. You also have your CEDAs and your CFAs. And having practitioners in these entities that are supposed to support small businesses and entrepreneurs that, one, for the most part, have never been on the other side of it. So when you look at, there's various businesses, and I'm going to name it. There's a business called Race Corp.
Yes.
And Race Corp is for entrepreneurs. It's for entrepreneurial businesses. Every single consultant that sits in that business has to have owned a small business.
Yes.
Because in order to be able to have interventions for small businesses, you need to understand the other side of it. And that's why it's successful.
Yes.
And actually, a lot of businesses that can trust their enterprise development funding with that business, because they know that these are people who understand the sector, understand small business. And so in government, you have people that have no experience in being in small and entrepreneurial businesses. But secondly, you have people, for the most part, who have not even actually consulted to entrepreneurial businesses or to small businesses. So that's one of the issues. The second is that there just has not been an imagination that thinks outside of the frameworks that exist. So there hasn't been an attempt to look at, for instance, beyond the model that sits for commercial funding for small business. The model is exactly the same as what a bank would use. And you need to have an imagination, and you need to have a vision that goes beyond that. You see the likes of Kenya and how funding happens in those countries that have done so well in startup communities and for small businesses, because they developed models that look a little different to what commercial finances do. And so that's what it's about. It's about having vision beyond what already exists. It's about looking at the realities and the context of the people that you serve, the businesses and institutions that you serve, and speaking directly to their issues while making sure that you actually do safeguard the funds of business. Absolutely.
Yes.
You have to talk about funding viable businesses, and you have to have models in place that assess what is viable in order to be able to then underwrite it accordingly.
You touched base on the manifesto about the 5 billion investments in the Tibet college sector. And as someone who was once an SLC president there, I have seen that there's been less focus on that side of town. A lot of young people go into campus within 3 months. They they drop out. A lot of students, they go to school there. After school, they're unemployed. Some don't even pass. And it seems like it's just been done passively, just by the way. And 5 billion investment into it. Give us an idea how you're gonna get this money and how will it transform the sector.
So first of all, we believe very much in the skills that the TVET sector can actually provide to young people.
Yes.
There's in-demand skills, such as
Plumbing.
There's in-demand skills. When you look at even some aspects of coding, and there are in-demand skills that exist.
Yes.
That really just require practical and vocational training and application. So we think that there is space for them, particularly in my Gauteng plan. What I outlined is to give young people the opportunity to get specialized education certificates.
Yes.
And so being able to find young people to be able to get those specialized education certificates in those in-demand skills, and being able to then say to those young people, we're willing to invest in your business. Once you have that skill, we're willing to invest in your business that then applies that skill for you to be able to then be able to employ other people, particularly in townships. So really for us, it's about making sure that we invest strongly in TVET colleges. It's also about giving young people the opportunity and educating young people about the opportunities that exist that can come from education that you have in TVET colleges as well. And then last is making sure that you invest, once the skills are there, you invest in businesses and operations being established to be able to put those skills to use.
Another problem that we've had in this country, you mentioned fees must fall. Some of us were there on the ground as well. And the question still remains, should we make education free, or should the rich continue to pay and others might be subsidized? Your view?
We will never transform this country if young people who come from families that cannot afford to have them in higher education don't have the opportunity to do so.
Yes.
So NSFAS is very, very important as an institution. And we have to make sure that NSFAS is led by credible and ethical leaders.
Yes.
Because really, NSFAS, its existence is really about the transformation of a country. And its challenge and its problem is about the wrong leadership. Yes. And leadership that is actually corrupt, and using the funds for its own benefit. Right now, we have a compromised CEO. And throughout that process, you look at how it's been structured, and really it's structured with the accommodation and everything that happens in that structure. It's been structured in order for people to be able to benefit, as always, with this current government. So NSFAS has to exist. There has to be funding for young people, and I think it is the responsibility of young people to pay back NSFAS once they are employed, once they do have the means to do so. I myself studied on a student loan. It wasn't from NSFAS, it was from a bank because my parents were able to underwrite that. But I paid it back. It was the first thing I paid back once I worked. And within 2 or 3 years. And that is the commitment that the people of South Africa need to have, because there's another young person who needs that funding as well.
Yeah, because you look at education right now and the way it's structured, most young people are worried that, okay, I can't get to college, I can't get to, after matric, I'm stuck. There I must pay money. Here I have to apply through NSFAS, and NSFAS doesn't really reply back on time. There's so many red tapes into it, and you are right that you'll be a disservice to the young minds of this country not to ensure that they have access to education. On a basic education level, in primary schools and high schools, we have 30% pass mark rate, but also we have kids who can't read for meaning at grade 4. Your view?
So we have to start there, even before we get to the higher education conversation we've had, because there are many young people that can't even make it to TVET or universities, because we have this pass mark of 30% for critical subjects.
Yes.
And that's the one thing, as Bildwan SA we've tabled as the first thing that we would change in the education sector, to be able to change that pass mark to 50%. Yes. Because at this 30%, it was January, everyone makes a noise and claps and dances, and you see them there and they have this song and dance about over 80% pass rates in matric. And then you have close to 70% of young people unemployed. It's the 30%. Because I, for one, don't want to hire somebody who passed at 30%.
Yes.
Really? And our young people can do better.
Yes.
They can do better. You have to have the right teachers in place. Those teachers have to be incentivized and rewarded accordingly.
True.
You have to have the resources in all the schools to be able to adequately make sure that young people are taught at an adequate level for them to be able to set up for success, to be set up for success. You have to be able to make sure what we've put is an education ombud that makes sure that you assess and investigate the performance of every school and that you're able to report issues and instances where there's an undermining of the standards that should be in every single school in this country. You really just have to make sure that the infrastructure and the resources, including teachers, that you have in place are able to set up our young people to be able to pass. If in our generation, if in generations after us, before you had this 30% mark, people were able to pass at 50%, these young people can certainly do so.
Definitely. Your manifesto focuses on 2 million jobs, and we have load shedding as well. We have companies closing down before time because there's no power. Now we have electricity, only God knows why. It's on somebody called uncapped electricity, right? And the question is service delivery overall in terms of ensuring that you have service coming to communities. You are fixing load shedding. You are making the environment conducive for job creation. What will BOSA do different than what we are having today?
I think, one, it's very important that you ensure that there is access to electricity for all. And so having a state-owned entity is important in that sense, because you make sure that you don't compromise those who would otherwise not be able to access electricity, right? But it's important to diversify that. So first of all, it's important to diversify the energy that we have. When you look at the fact that currently coal is just not going to be sufficient, and there are other issues that relate to coal that you have to look at environmentally, etc. So it's important to make sure that we diversify and we have alternative energy that's available. That's first important. The second, though, is to make sure that we diversify in the sense that you also have private players that are able, so that South Africans can have a choice in terms of who they partner with as it pertains to energy suppliers.
Yes.
So that is important as well. When you think back on telecommunications and telco, we initially, before Telkom was sold, had an option for South Africans where ultimately you got to a position where South Africans could choose who their telco provider was. You had private companies that you could choose, and the state-owned entity was also there. You know, and we need to make sure that that's the kind of model that we have in order to have competition for Eskom, first of all. And in order to make sure that you have the benefits of that competition, so that you know that Eskom is able to be efficiently run and be efficient in that sense. So that is important. And also that then creates opportunity even for small businesses. If they're able to build, own, operate, then they have opportunity to also play in the sector. What's important though is to make sure that there's transparency. That there's transparency with NERSA and with all the utilities and with everybody that sits in terms of energy, in terms of the tariffs, in terms of the costing and pricing, etc. But what is important is diversifying and making sure that we have alternative sources of energy and other players in the space as well.
So, you as the incoming Premier of Gauteng, Hammanskraal hasn't had water for 30 years now. There are many communities that have not even, they're still struggling to get water consistently.
Yeah.
In the city that is seen as the most beautiful, Gauteng Maboneng, as a premier coming into office, how can we resolve water crisis for the people of Gauteng?
You know, when we started Build One SA, September 2022, we immediately started campaigning. The first thing I noticed was that we are at the cusp of a water crisis. Because almost every community I went into, not just in Gauteng, across the country, there was a water shortage, or there was inconsistency of water supply, or there was simply no water.
Northwest.
Northwest, Limpopo, some communities in KZN, many more communities than I thought in Gauteng.
Yes.
So, we started then looking into this issue of water. We started investigating into it, found that, about half of the municipalities in this country are supplying water that is not adequate for and that is not safe for human consumption. We started to find out that there are issues with infrastructure, with infrastructure maintenance.
Yes.
There are issues with tender corruption as it pertains to infrastructure maintenance. Part of it has to do with the commercial supply of water, which is an income via the Department of Water and Sanitation for this country. And you're finding that there are contracts that have been given and infrastructure that has not been maintained. Yes. So there are private businesses that are now not only compromised by load shedding, but they're operating here in Gauteng that are also then large businesses that are also then compromised by water supply because there's issues with infrastructure maintenance.
True.
Then we started supplying water because we call ourselves a government in working. And got into communities and we looked and we're like, look, we can't be a government in waiting. We have to actually just become a government working in work. So we started supplying water tanks in various communities here in Gauteng and in other provinces, installing boreholes. Just because you come into a community and you just can't leave without, you're like, okay, so for whatever small funds we're supposed to have for campaigning, let's actually just rather use them to help this community. That's what we started doing and partnering with communities to do that. In some instances, communities were saying, look, we'll make sure we do the upkeep, just
protected, make sure
it's clean. Please help us to just have water. And so we really started looking into that and what needs to happen. So first of all, I've written, as Gauteng Premier candidates, I've written a letter to the mayors in the province to say, as they're about to table budgets, they must all allocate funds towards a water emergency fund, an emergency water fund, because there are water issues in pretty much every region.
Yes.
In this province.
And look at that. Gauteng not only we have nice suburbs and some places in the townships that are what we call them middle class areas in a way.
Yeah.
But we also have what you call squatter camps. We also have what you call they'll call them informal settlements. People are coming here every single year for opportunities, and housing is still a problem. And I remember reading your manifesto prioritizing that. And also there's an issue of land as well. So if you're gonna get housing, how are you gonna get the land to build it? So you promised us housing, Premier. How are you gonna get those houses?
Before I get to the housing, I want to finish off this water thing because it's such a real issue. The other issue to look at is bureaucratic appointment, because what you're finding in municipalities as well is that you've got people that don't have the skills to be able to ensure that we keep our water clean, quality work. There's cadre deployment. And we don't have the right people to be able to make sure that water distribution is the way it should be, to be able to make sure that the whole water supply is the way it should be. So that's another one. The second is treatment plants, to actually be able to localize water treatment plants, because that gives opportunity, first of all, to localized businesses, but also it's then partnering with the private sector, and then you don't have the pressure and full reliance on supply of water within government as well. Yes. And then lastly, dams. There's only been 2 dams built over the past 20 years or so. In Gauteng, we do need to have a dam that's built, because at the rate that we're going, we might find we're not future planning and future proofing.
Yes.
So also need to look at the dams. I just wanted to finish that water issue because it's one I've become very passionate about. Because while people can fix and solve for no electricity, there's gas, you do all these things, there's inverters, people have solar panels, etc. The water one is another one altogether.
No, definitely. I look at the water crisis. I'm from the Northwest, and when you get home, people are buying tanks for 10 rand, 30 rand. It's literally a business now in villages where people are buying water. There hasn't been much leadership with vision to say we are going into power. How are you going to ensure that this community has water, the maintenance of what already exists?
Yeah.
I know that even in Hamaskali issue, the issue there at some point is more of maintenance. And I look at this and I say, but then you're gonna have more housing in Gauteng. You're gonna have more people moving in here. How do we ensure that they have water? I know you did a program in the West End where you give a borehole, but then in terms of land and housing, how do we give it to them with water included?
So we currently in Gauteng are sitting at 1.2 million people on a waiting list for housing.
Sure.
As I've gone around the province, many of these people have been waiting since 1996.
Sure, you're right.
People have grown kids who have been waiting for their families or their parents or their grandparents to have housing since before they were born. True. People sitting with approvals, waiting for housing to this day. And part of the issue, there's a couple of reasons. And, we marched to Bafana Modise office just last week to address this issue of housing and to say that there needs to be an investigation. Before he vacates office, there needs to be an investigation into what has been the process, what is the supply chain, what does it look like, who's benefiting and how.
Yes.
And that's what we've asked for, and that's what we will follow up on. But how this needs to be solved, first of all, is that the reason people are waiting and have been waiting all these years is to promise that the state is going to be capable, or via tenders, that you're going to build for all these 1.2 million people. It would take, at the rate that government is building now in Gauteng, it would take 120 years.
Sure.
For these people to all get their houses. So the first problem was to say, we're all going to build you free houses. Problem. There's a couple of problems with that because it is not sustainable. Two, it takes away the ownership that people want to have of even their own homes. When you speak to residents of Gauteng, when you speak to South Africans, people want their own thing.
Yes.
They want a house that looks the way they want it to look. They want a house that serves their needs as a family. And when you speak to people, they're not necessarily wanting you to build a house for them. They're just saying, help me, subsidize me to be able to build a house. And so the Build One Say plan is to say, let us give people service stands. Like you say, needs to be able to make sure we can supply water, sanitation, make sure there's roads, supply service stands, and then with the money that was going to be allocated via these dodgy tenders to people to be able to build for the residents. You give that allocation. If the allocation is 200,000, give that allocation to the resident via voucher. They always love and say we're a voucher party. We believe in vouchers because they put power back in the hands of people.
Yes.
Give that to residents as a voucher and then say you can go buy your own building material and build your own house. You can have service providers that are approved and accredited where this building material is bought, and they must be local. In that way, we're also stimulating local economy.
Yes.
So that is the Build One SA plan. It is to say, first of all, make it sustainable, because then you're not saying that you have to build 1.2 million people houses, because actually, essentially, you're going to struggle to do that practically. But secondly, you're saying you're putting power back in people's hands. And you're saying that we're supporting you, but we're saying you do the rest.
Yes.
We're giving you what you need. We're giving you the resource. You do the rest. You build your house. Secondly, you're stimulating a local economy.
There's a part in the manifesto you speak about public and private partnership. So is that an idea where you're going to build up maybe an estate of some sort, and you subsidize the people? Is that the plan?
Absolutely. So there has to be different programs, and they have to suit and work for different people. So, there's some people who need a service stand and need to be able to have access to that building material to build their house.
Yes.
There's somebody else who says, I want to live either in a high-rise building. As a young person, I'm starting out. I need that kind of security to live with others, to live in a communal kind of space. And that's what I need. I just need to be subsidized. And what we're seeing, actually, what we've tabled is that we need to be able to subsidize young people who are starting out, subsidize and or underwrite their loans to be able to get their first housing, to get their first house or the first property. But when you speak about public partnerships, that's where you can work with local property developers to be able to build those kind of whether it's complexes, whether it's high rises, and then you're able to, as business, as government, be able to subsidize to a certain extent those buildings as well.
I'm gonna go into Gauteng CBD or Johannesburg CBD. Even myself, when I walk there, I hold my bag very close and make sure my phone is here. People don't feel safe anymore. When you're in the CBD, also immigrants are there, businesses are running, they're not registered. It's a chaos, Premier. How do we then solve the crisis in the CBD, where South Africans, first of all, don't feel safe, but second of all, they feel like the businesses now are overtaken by illegal immigrants and government is doing nothing about it?
So I think the importance of monitoring, constant monitoring, is important.
Yes.
And visibility. When it comes to safety, you have to have visibility of the police force on the ground. So you need more boots on the ground as a first, and that's something that we've tabled in our manifesto. You need a more professionalized police service.
Yes.
Because as it stands now, you find that there's a lack of professionalism from every aspect of law enforcement in the city, in the province. So you have to make sure that you professionalize the service. You have to make sure that people have easy access to law enforcement. You know, every time you try to figure out how do I actually get hold of the cops, it's not always easy. And so there has to be a free line, a toll-free line that exists.
One?
No,
Is it not working?
No, tangible one is not working. You have to have a toll-free line that works. Maybe let me put it that way. You have to have a toll-free line that works, that has adequate capacity, and that is, 24-hour adequately resourced to respond to people as they call in. Monitoring is important. You need to be able to have cameras in strategic places to be able to make sure that you are monitoring activity that's taking place, particularly in the CBD. You need to tighten up even issues of, you talk about how dirty it is. You need to be able to monitor even that kind of thing, the littering that takes place in the city. Presence and visibility does that. And for that, you do need more boots on the ground. You do need a more professionalized service. Even now, as you speak to illegal immigrants, that takes a professional visibility that is able to go and make sure that people who are trading are people who are licensed to do so, for instance, that people who are trading are people who have the requisite citizenship in order to be able to do so.
So I'm going to get straight into it.
Yeah.
Melville, Yeoville, they're hijacked by illegal foreigners. This city alone, everywhere you go, what do we do with them? Do we, under your power, under your leadership, do we deport them back into their countries or do we naturalize them?
What we're very clear about, as Bildona says, is that the issue isn't immigrants or foreigners. The issue is illegal immigrants and foreigners. And that actually starts at the border. So we have to make sure that we tighten our borders. We have to make sure that we have credible leadership, because it always sometimes it just sounds like you're saying the same thing over and over again. But our biggest issue is that we don't have the right leadership. We don't. So there is corruption at every level, in every department. There is corruption. So the porous borders are porous because there's corruption at the border. So you have to make sure that you tighten your borders, you have the right kind of leadership, so that to begin with, you don't have the issue of an influx of illegal immigrants that we have in this country. Refugees who are here because they are refugees, that has got to be better organized in this country. That has got to be managed, within the right kind of shelters for refugees, ensuring that the time period, that the process of refugees being in the country is monitored and managed as well. So that's what we've got to do. We've got to make sure that we tighten our borders. We have to make sure that we manage who gets in and out of this country and that they're legal. We have to make sure that the people who are trading and transacting in the country are doing so legally.
Definitely. I want to let you go, but before I let you go, the multi-party charter, people are talking about that. Why are you not part of it? What, you don't trust the DA?
We have the BOSA Alliance, right, which we publicly unveiled a couple of weeks ago. But we have in effect had it since we launched. When we launched, we started working. The first party we worked with was AIM, a party that's in Nelson Mandela Bay, led by Mkhosini Jag. And they actually were integral in setting up our Eastern Cape structures. And in fact, our provincial leader and provincial premier candidate in the Eastern Cape comes from AIM. So we have been working with, and it comes from the OSA kind of model. People forget is that we grew as BOSA out of OSA. So when we founded BOSA, OSA had existed, and we had all these Section 15As and political parties that already existed that we then could work with in BOSA, and more came to the fold, and we added them. And so what these parties have agreed on is to have BOSA on the ballot for national and provincial elections. We will then support them for local elections in the requisite territories that they are contesting in. The difference between that and the multi-party charter is that we are not contesting amongst ourselves as these parties. We're then not mudslinging against ourselves in the build-up to elections. We're saying we have chosen one party to put on the ballot, and actually we are then consolidating numbers and saying the numbers all come to this one party, and we will then support these parties continuously in different ways in the local territories that they're in. The multi-party charter, it exists, it's there, but we had our own reasons for not being part of them, including the fact that you don't want to consolidate and then deconsolidate at the polls when you then again go and split the vote.
There's a question that was asked, and this is the last one, I promise you. I was asked the question, Musi and Hammond, they are good guys. They came from the same party. They left the party at the same time. Why can't you guys join hands in together? Why can't you work together? Or what makes you guys different?
Yeah. So first of all, I want to say, and I want to add to the last thing I said when we're talking about coalitions. We are open, by the way, to talking with other political parties. Even post-elections. The conditions are that we have to share the same values, we have to share the same principles, and we have to be willing to coalesce around the South African agenda, not around positions.
True.
You've recently heard the EFF say we will go into bed with the ANC if we get the position of Minister of Finance. No, it can't be about positions. It can't be about proximity to the purse. It has got to be about what have we as a party got to contribute to South Africa? Where are we strong? Which area are we strongest in? Which policy do we believe strongest in that we want to implement? You, as the other party on the other side of the table, what are your skills? What are your, where do you feel you have the strongest credentials, and what do you want to contribute?
True.
So let's coalesce around that. Let's coalesce around skills and what we have to contribute to South Africa, not positions. And let's coalesce around the right values and the same values. And let's make sure we're putting a job in every home while we do that. But on your question of Action SA, we have a good relationship with Action SA. We are different though. First of all, just when you look at our model of how we have chosen our leaders, we've gone to communities. We are community-based, and we've said communities must choose their leaders. They must endorse their leaders. 1,000 signatures. They must nominate their leaders as a start. I mean, there are other things that are different, but as a start, that's where we're different. When we founded Build One SA with Musi, it was about saying, there's something missing. There's something that we can't see anywhere else. I, for one, going into politics, knowing it was time for me to come now and put, my hands into the mix, into building One South Africa. I looked and there was nothing that I saw that looked like it was putting power back into the hands of people, and it was truly for people, by people. And so that's why we built Build One South Africa. Action SA already existed at the time, but we were different in what we were modeling and what we were building, in that as a start, we said, South Africans, choose your leaders.
Definitely. Nobuntu Webster, the incoming premier of Gauteng. I have one last question for you. The camera is just next to me here. Why should the people of Gauteng vote for you to be their premier? Go.
So the people of Gauteng should vote for me to be the premier because, first of all, I am a resident of Gauteng before anything else. I come saying that I have been a leader in business in Gauteng. I'm a mother in Gauteng. I'm a wife in Gauteng. I'm a resident. And I came to Gauteng 12 years ago because this was a place that we've known as the place of dreams. This was a place that we've known as an economic hub. In Zulu, we would say, "Kwandonga ziyaduma, inyama ayipheli, kuphela amazinyo endoda." But today, when you look at Gauteng, that's not what Gauteng is. When you look at Gauteng, when you look at the streets of Gauteng, when you look at the realities of the residents of Gauteng, that's not what it is. And my plan is to build Gauteng into the economic hub of this country again. I've tabled my plans to do that. And we've got the right candidates who are skilled in diverse sectors to be able to make this happen. It's time to build Gauteng again. It's time to make it the economic hub again. And when you build Gauteng, and when Gauteng is economically at the forefront again, we'll start to see South Africa change and be where it's supposed to be as the gateway to Africa.
Yes, that's Nobuntu Webster, the deputy president of BOSA and also the premier candidate of the party. Did she win your vote? Are you voting for BOSA on the 29th of May? Share your comments on the comment section. And this was Manifesto Unpacked. I am Bafana Modise, proudly brought to you by a podcast party. See you next time. Ciao, ciao.